$16.5 million is sitting on a counter in Des Moines. Nobody will say who won it. It is the 29th of December, 2011. 2 hours to the deadline. 2 lawyers have carried the ticket in. They represent a trust in New York, tied to a company in Belize. The lottery asks one question: who bought this? Nobody answers. Nothing in this story adds up. Not the odds, not the prize, and not the numbers in the state's own books. For weeks later, the claim is withdrawn. The largest prize in the history of that game is never paid to anybody. It takes 3 more years to learn why. And the answer is this: the man who bought that ticket wrote the software that picked the numbers. So the first question is mechanical. How do you make a random number generator stop being random inside a locked room with no internet connection, on camera, with more than one person watching? You will see exactly how, because he eventually explained it himself in a courtroom under oath. The second question is the one that outlives him. This fraud moved somewhere around $24 million in prizes over 6 years across 5 states. That is the small number in this video. In fiscal 2024, American state lotteries sold $104.7 billion in tickets, paid out $70.2 billion in prizes, and kept $34.5 billion. Every cent of that is legal, audited, and published. By the end, you will see where it actually goes and why nobody can show you the schools it was promised to. Start with the room. Hot Lotto was run by the Multi-State Lottery Association, a nonprofit owned by the state lotteries themselves, headquartered in Urbandale, Iowa, about 10 miles from the shop where that ticket was bought. Most people picture a lottery as plastic balls in a tumbler. This one was not. The winning numbers came out of a computer. That computer sat in a glass-walled drawer room. It was never connected to the internet. It was watched by a camera. Getting in took more than one person, and every visit was logged. Every one of those measures is aimed at the same threat, and it is worth naming the threat precisely. Nobody in that building was worried about a stranger on the internet because there is no internet in that room. They were worried about the thing the room was made of. A computer does not roll anything. It runs a program that produces a number and calls it random, and the honesty of that number lives entirely inside the software, which means the security of the whole game is not a lock or a camera. It is a question about a person who wrote the program and who is allowed near it. On paper, it is one of the most controlled rooms in American government, and the thing it protects is not the money. It is the belief that the draw is fair. Take that away, and nobody ever buys a ticket again. So who guards it? From 2003, a software engineer from Texas named Eddie Tipton worked at that association. For his last 2 years there, his title was Director of Information Security. The man who had written code that produced drawing numbers was also the man responsible for protecting the room where it ran. That is the whole vulnerability, and notice what it is not. Nobody broke in. On the 20th of November, 2010, Tipton entered the draw room on ordinary business to reset the clocks on the drawing computers. Prosecutors would later say he carried a thumb drive. And on that day, the camera watching that room recorded 1 second per minute. Not continuously. 1 second, then nothing, then 1 second. We should be careful about what can and cannot be known about Eddie Tipton. We know his job. We know his code. We do not know what he told himself inside that room. And this video is not going to invent it for him. What we do have is his own account, given years later after he had already lost. He said he had installed a single piece of code, starting in 2005, that narrowed the odds of a drawing down to roughly 200 to 1. Sit with that design for a second, because it is the clever part. He did not make himself win. He made the machine choose from a pool small enough that a person who knew the pool could simply cover it. A rigged lottery that always pays the same man is caught in a week. A lottery that quietly becomes winnable on 3 days a year for 6 years in 5 different states is not caught at all, unless somebody hears a voice. From here it becomes a ladder, because every solution he found created the next problem. Problem 1. Knowing the numbers is useless if you cannot buy the ticket. An employee of the association cannot claim a prize from its own games, and a man who works in a draw room walking up with a jackpot ends the story on day one. So the winners have to be other people. 23rd of November, 2005. Colorado. A ticket worth about $568,000 is claimed by Tommy Tipton, Eddie's brother, at that time a justice of the peace in Texas. Problem solved. New problem. The winner is now a public official who shares his surname. 29th of December, 2007. Wisconsin. A megabucks jackpot of $783,257.12 is claimed by Robert Rhodes, a friend and business associate. Rhodes had the numbers written out for him on an index card. Problem solved. New problem. There is now a witness, and there is a piece of paper. December 2010. Kansas. 2 small tickets on a game called 2x2, worth about $44,000 together. Small enough that nobody looks twice. That was the discipline of it. Modest amounts spread across different states, years apart. And then, on the 29th of December, 2010, the same machinery pays a jackpot in Iowa worth $16.5 million. This is where the ladder breaks. $16.5 million is not a number you hand to your brother. It is not a number a friend cashes with an index card in his pocket. It comes with a press conference, a photograph, a face, and a name. So the answer was a structure. A trust called Hexam Investments, registered in Bedford, New York, tied to a corporation in Belize. A 76-year-old New York attorney named Crawford Shaw acting as trustee. A respected Des Moines law firm to carry the ticket in on the final afternoon. Every layer of that is legal. People shield lottery wins behind trusts constantly. But this is Iowa, and Iowa wants to know which human being bought the ticket. When the lottery asks, the lawyers cannot answer, because the honest answer ends everything. On the 26th of January, 2012, Crawford Shaw withdraws the claim. $16.5 million, won, verified, and walked away from. That same week, the Iowa Lottery asked the Attorney General's office and the Division of Criminal Investigation to open a criminal case. Look at what has actually happened here. The technical fraud worked perfectly. Every part of the machine did what it was built to do, and the whole operation collapses anyway. Not because of security, not because of an audit, but because of the one thing the design never solved. Somebody has to stand at a counter and say their name out loud. Sit in that chair for a moment, because it is a stranger place than it looks. You are holding a piece of paper worth $16.5 million. It is genuine. The lottery has already confirmed that the numbers match. Nobody is accusing you of anything because nobody knows you exist. And you cannot turn it into a single dollar without doing the one thing that convicts you. So you wait. The prize expires in a year, and you spend most of that year waiting. You hire lawyers, and they buy you time down to the final afternoon. You build a trust, and you put a stranger's name on top of it, and you hope the state will accept a signature instead of face. And the state says no. Not because it suspects fraud, because that is simply the rule. Iowa wants to know who bought the ticket. Notice how ordinary that requirement is. It is not a security system. Nobody audited the code to catch him. Nobody spotted a pattern in 6 years of drawings across 5 states. The thing that beat the most sophisticated lottery fraud in American history was a clerk's question at a counter and a rule that a name has to go on a form. And notice the cost of that rule to him. Not prison, not yet. $16.5 million, held in his hand, verified as genuine and completely worthless. Hold that feeling because we're coming back to it. Later in this video, $34.5 billion a year moves out of people's pockets in exactly the opposite way. No name required from anybody. Now the money. Not his money, the business he was standing inside. This is the first chart in this video, and it is here for a reason. It is not lotteries alone. It is what Americans spend in a year on gambling of every kind, measured by the Bureau of Economic Analysis as part of national consumption. In 1959, $643 million. In 1990, $23.7 billion. In the year $2,067.6 billion. In 2025, $229.3 billion. That is not a national hobby. That is one of the largest consumer categories in the country, and the state lottery is the slice of it that the state itself owns, runs, and advertises. So how does that slice work as a business? Three economists, in a working paper for the National Bureau of Economic Research, took a year when American lottery sales were about $87 billion and pulled the dollar apart. 60 cents came back to players as prizes. About 6.5 cents went to the shop that sold the ticket. Just under 4 cents paid for running the operation. And 29 cents went to state government. The paper calls that what it is, an implicit tax. Then it points at something that runs the opposite way to intuition. That state share used to be 34 cents back in 1995. It has been falling ever since. Not because states got generous, because scratch tickets took over the business, and scratch tickets pay out more per dollar. They pay out more because that is what makes people buy the next one. For 2.5 years, the case goes nowhere. A withdrawn claim, a trust that runs to Belize, and no crime anybody can put a name on. Then, in July 2014, a retiring Deputy Attorney General hands the file to a younger Assistant Attorney General named Rob Sand. In October, Iowa does the thing that decides the entire case. It releases the shop's surveillance recording to the public. Not just the pictures, the audio. A man in a hooded sweatshirt buying hot dogs and a lottery ticket, chatting to the clerk. And two people who have never met each other recognize the voice. Michael Boardman, a marketing manager at the Maine State Lottery, had met Tipton days earlier, while Tipton was in Maine doing a security audit. Kathy Cubitt, a web developer at the Iowa Lottery, had been hearing him on work calls since 2003. In court, she described it precisely. Quote, "The voice on the video matched his timbre, his intonation and inflection, particularly certain words that were said. The Iowa Lottery's chief executive, Terry Rich, put it more plainly. Quote, "It was the audio, when it was released, that actually gave him up, not the video. He was just really unlucky that he went into that particular store and bought the ticket." On the 15th of January, 2015, Eddie Tipton is arrested and charged with 2 felony counts of fraud. At trial, Rob Sand called it a 21st century inside job. But voice is not a weapon, and prosecutors still had no code. The program was built to delete itself, and the association's drives had been wiped. Then, in 2016, a computer scientist in Wisconsin named Sean McClendon went through a machine that nobody had wiped and rebuilt what the software actually did. It behaved perfectly 362 days a year. On 3 dates only, the 27th of May, the 22nd of November, and the 29th of December, and then only if the drawing fell on a Wednesday or a Saturday after 8 in the evening, it produced numbers that could be predicted in advance. Now look again at the dates on those winning tickets. Colorado, the 23rd of November. Wisconsin, the 29th of December. Iowa, the 29th of December. The mistakes that ended this were not really his. They belonged to the people and the institutions around him. His brother claimed prizes in Colorado and later in Oklahoma. His friend cashed a Wisconsin jackpot in his own name and kept the index card. Every one of them was a person who could be found, questioned, and offered a deal. Then there is the association itself. In 2010, it had no way to detect a rootkit on its own drawing machines. The room's camera was recording 1 second a minute. The drives that would have held the evidence were wiped. And on the 7th of August, 2015, 7 months after Tipton's arrest, the Iowa Lottery's vice president of security wrote an internal memo. An independent audit had found a lack of security protocols and oversight at the association. His recommendation was to suspend sales of Hot Lotto and 3 other games immediately. The games were not suspended. The following year, the association's board president wrote to a United States Senate committee that, quote, "MUSL is confident that its current procedures address all known risks that lottery game drawings by MUSL can be compromised." And through all of it, the thing itself never stopped growing. Take inflation out completely. Hold prices fixed at $2017, so you are measuring the real volume of what people buy. American gambling consumption still climbs from $129 billion in 2007 to $174 billion in 2025. There is one dip in 2020 when the casinos were closed by law. It lasted a single year. The 22nd of August, 2017. A courtroom in Polk County, Iowa. Eddie Tipton stands up to speak. Weeks earlier, he had pleaded guilty in Wisconsin, and then in Iowa, to one felony count of ongoing criminal conduct. What he says is the closest thing to a full confession this case ever produced. Quote, I wrote software that included code that allowed me to understand or technically predict winning numbers, and I gave those numbers to other individuals who then won the jackpots and shared the proceeds with me. And then, quote, I certainly regret it. It's difficult even saying that with all the people I know behind me that I hurt, and I regret it. I'm sorry. The sentence is up to 25 years. No mandatory minimum. Restitution of $2,222,864, later reduced by the court to $1,653,000. Now watch what those numbers turn into. His brother Tommy served 75 days. Robert Rhodes got 2 years of probation and 6 months of home confinement. And Eddie Tipton walked out of the Clarinda prison on parole on the 15th of July, 2022, having served just over 5 years. The restitution went the way restitution usually goes. By 2019, the Des Moines Register found Oklahoma had recovered $532 of the $644,000 it was owed. Colorado had recovered $470 of $1.1 million. Kansas had received $25.44. The biggest lottery fraud in American history cost one man 5 years and a few $100s a state. Hold that number, because we are about to put a legal one next to it. 45 states run a lottery. 5 do not. Alabama, Alaska, Hawaii, Nevada, and Utah. In fiscal 2008, Americans spent $52.8 billion on tickets. By fiscal 2024, $104.7 billion. Prizes over that period went up 118%, from $32.2 billion to $70.2 billion. What the states kept went up 68%, from $20.6 billion to $34.5 billion, which means the states now keep 33 cents of every dollar, where they used to keep 39. So who hands over the dollar? This is where the argument usually dissolves into opinion. So let us stay with the least arguable sources that exist. A federal commission reporting to Congress in 1999 found that among people who had played in the previous year, the top 5% of players accounted for 54% of all sales. The top 20% accounted for 82%. A segmentation study commissioned by the Massachusetts Lottery in 2016 found its top 10% of players producing about 40% of sales, spending an average of nearly $200 a week. Then there is Melissa Kearney's work in the Journal of Public Economics, which asked what happens to households when a state introduces a lottery at all. Their spending on everything else falls by about $46 a month. Among low-income households, the decline is around 2.5% and 3.1% in states that sell instant scratch games. And the categories the money comes out of are not entertainment budgets. They're food eaten at home and rent and mortgage payments. Now set that against what the people making those payments earn. This is the median American worker's weekly pay, adjusted for inflation, in constant dollars. 1979, $331.50 a week. 2025, $375. 46 years, 13%. Over those same decades, the money flowing into gambling multiplied many times over. The take grew. The payer did not. So, 2 questions. The first one has an answer, and it is small, ugly, and mechanical. You do not beat a lottery by breaking into it. You get hired by it, you write the numbers yourself, and the only thing that stops you is that eventually somebody has to stand at a counter and say a name. The second question does not have a clean answer, and that absence is the finding. $34.5 billion a year is not stolen. It is legislated, audited, and published, and in most states it arrives wrapped in a promise about schools. The Texas Lottery puts it on its own website. The biggest winner of all is Texas education and veterans. Economists have spent 2 decades testing that promise. Evans and Zhang, in Education, Finance, and Policy, found that only 50 to 70 cents of each earmarked lottery dollar actually reaches local school districts. Erickson and colleagues found lottery money substituting for general funds that would have gone to education anyway. A later comparison of earmarking states against general fund states found earmarking made little or no difference to what schools actually received. The money is real. The schools are real. The line between them is an accounting decision made after the ticket is sold by people who are not on camera. In North Carolina, according to a state education advocacy group, the original bill said lottery money should supplement school funding rather than substitute for it. That sentence was removed before the vote. And the $16.5 million? Because nobody could be paid, the prize was divided among the 15 jurisdictions that ran Hot Lotto. Iowa's share came to roughly $1.4 million, and Iowa law says money from unclaimed prizes goes back to players. So the state added $600,000 from another unclaimed jackpot and spent the $2 million on player giveaways, including a $1 million prize at the Iowa State Fair. The money a fraud tried to steal was returned to the machine and used to sell more tickets. Eddie Tipton has been on parole in Texas since 2022. The association replaced its generators, its cameras, and its procedures. 2 years later, its new system was producing repeat numbers in Arizona, traced to an overheating monitor. And sales keep setting records. One man rigged a drawing on 3 days a year and went to prison for 5. The machine takes $34.5 billion a year and files it under education funding. If you could end only one of those two, which one goes?